Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with a virtual tasting society. I'm Vadim Perlovsky, and today I'm excited to welcome back Oliver Chilton. Oliver joined us last time for what was it? Elements of Isla and Black Tot, right?
Yeah, yes, I think it was about this time in the morning, so I remember some of it.
Awesome. And last time we threatened to have you back to talk about single malt of Scotland because it's an independent bottling that I absolutely love. I haven't had a bad expression yet, so we're happy to have you back. Thank you so much, Sam Filmus, for organizing this and getting us all together on this awesome evening. We have six amazing expressions in front of us, but we're excited to learn all about single malt of Scotland, how you pick, how you blend, how you tell us everything. Tell us about for some of the members here are probably meeting you for the first time, so please introduce yourself, tell us where you work, what you do, and then we can jump right in.
Right. So for those that don't know me, my name is Ollie. I have worked for Elixir Distillers for the last 14 years. Um, One way or another, we're an independent bottler, a blender, and a distiller. The distiller bit is still relatively new to us. We only started distilling in 2022 when we bought Tormore Distillery, which is where I live and I'm calling you from. It's really pretty, although at the moment it's really dark, so I can't show you anything. Um, and if I were to go outside, I'd freeze, so I'm not doing that either. Um, I have been with the business about 14 years, but I started in our shops. As the company itself, we actually originated at a shop called the Whiskey Exchange, which started life in 1999. And we started buying casks and bottling them in around 2002 or 2001, depending on how many drinks I give our founder Skinder and how accurate it is with history. Um, and that history is relatively similar to quite a lot of independent bottlers. You know, if you go back in time, you look at people like Gordon MacPhail and Cadden Heads, that they're all essentially shops that bought casks and sold it to their customers, just a couple of hundred years older than us. Um, and it was a passion project. So when we started the retailer who liked buying bottles and selling bottles to customers. Um, and the step up from bottles is casks, because it gives you a chance to explore different distilleries. And back then in the early 2000s, it was easy to become an independent bottler in terms of finding good whiskey. There wasn't much demand, there weren't many people trying to buy whiskey, so it was easy to find a lot of really good Scotch whiskey. As time has gone on, it's definitely become more challenging, and we've kind of changed the way we work. And certainly when I joined the business, the way in which we started building stocks was to work much closer with distillers, filling our own casks, but also just buying larger parcels. And as we go through the tasting, I'll explain how that's different maybe to some other bottlers, and also how the challenges it gives you, the benefits, and how that affects probably what you're going to drink tonight. Um, in terms of what we're drinking tonight, everything is well, hopefully around Scotland. The list said we've got a little bit of Highland, a little bit of Space Island, a little bit of Islay. We do bottle from pretty much every region, and we've bottled from most distilleries. There's probably a few missing, um, but we've got relatively good stocks of whiskey. Um, I always think of SMoS being quite classic. We're not, Single Malt Scotland is one of those bottling lines where we're not looking to mess around. We're not doing massively fancy casks or massively um, showy labels. Everything is very classic. It is all about finding kind of the heart of each distillery and talking about that style and what was going on at the distillery at that time, and hopefully allowing the spirit to kind of shine through. Um, yeah. Uh, did I say what I do? Today, so I've done a bit of everything, but today my main job is drinking too much, which is probably why I'm incoherent. It's not being 3 in the morning. So with that, I need lots of engagement to keep me going. So if you've got questions, just ask throughout, because otherwise I will either witter like I'm doing now, or fall asleep, which would not be ideal for a Zoom tasting. It has happened before, not to myself, but to some very good friends of mine. So I'd rather not be the one where it happens on video. Um, yeah, shall we jump straight in and start drinking? Because that'll probably help
Yeah,
me.
absolutely. I did have one quick question. I mean, and we can discuss this as we go. Single Malt Scotland is so great. You guys don't even have a website. Like, what's up with that?
It's a good question. Um, so I guess Single Malts of Scotland kind of became the hobby business. When I started, it was something we did on the side of everything else. So it was we used to only really sell them in our shops, and then I had I guess 10 customers around the world. So what it was never like a massive line. We didn't force like marketing. I never had any pressure. I don't think I've ever had any pressure in terms of having to make lots of money. That wasn't, it was very much a hobby for my boss Sukhinder. If you never met Sukhinder, he's an interesting guy. They built up their business from a garage, so they're not like massively flash rich guys who came in with lots of money. Um, so he's just a crazy collector who he would argue got lucky. I would argue works far too hard. I mean, he's still, if I go on to Teams, he's probably still there right now, which is a little bit disturbing. Um, and for that reason, we never really did any marketing. We never did, I rarely talk about Single Malts of Scotland at shows. I rarely get asked to do tastings. Um, we put a little bit more focus on it for about 2 years. I think when we launched in the US, and then then we stopped again because we always get busy with other things. As you guys know, we've got Elements of Isla, we've got Podascape, we've got Blacktop. We own a very reasonable sized distillery in Speyside called Tormore, which we hope to be launching some whiskey from in the not too distant future. And for that reason, Single Malt Scotland just becomes this kind of thing that we just do. Um, we probably should have a website. We should probably have some social media feeds as well, but that would take someone else to look at it rather than just me drinking whiskey and putting it into cask. Um,
Yeah, I've done
basically,
research. I couldn't find it. Literally, elixirdistillers.com doesn't have it listed as one of their brands. It's the craziest thing. It's one of those like, if you know, you know, and just very interesting concept. I mean, it's cool.
yeah, okay, marketing not my strongest point. Um,
I would hope that that is not on your plate.
no, well, most days not. No, but it's got its own following. It's mainly among whiskey enthusiasts who've been drinking for a very long time. Um, and to be fair, and it's probably better known even in the US. We do so little in the UK. I never see SMoS. It's not really something we ever do here at all. We just bottle it. We sell it to half a dozen shops. I've got a shop down the road in Speyside in Aberlour who stock it. And that's about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got all my information from the Impex website. They have you guys well positioned. Should we pour some before I get more questions?
Yeah, go for it. So we're going to start tonight with the Ben Rinnes 13-year-old. Sam, keep me honest if I get this wrong, right? Because I know we put a list together. I'm not sure how that all got communicated.
Yep.
You're
Uh,
doing well so far.
thank you. Uh, so we're starting with a Ben Rinnes 13-year-old. It's distilled in 2010. Cask number 307467. Always made me laugh because we put all these details on the in the label, which I completely agree. It helps you find the particular cask, but um, cask numbers really don't tell you very much. I used to get questions like, "Oh, could you tell me, what was the difference between the cask next door?" And I'm like, "Well, they're probably very similar." And I can't really remember. This is probably the best example of the kind of world I now sadly live in. So Ben Rinnes is a relatively big workhorse distillery owned by Diageo, not 20 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. It's gone through a few different kind of stages in its life. Up until around 2008, it was triple distilled, and then they switched the style to making a slightly heavier, fuller, kind of nutty style of spirit. Interestingly, it was actually in 2010, it was run by Polly Logan, who's the distillery manager of Tormore now. So I get loads of insight. Just phone her up. So what on earth were you doing? Why is the spirit different? Um, and then she gets annoyed at me for asking. Um, so at this point in 2010, it's a slightly bigger, fuller spirit. In terms of the wood profile, this is just a kind of classic refill hogshead. So what that means is it's an older cask. It will be used for Scotch. When we buy wood in general in Scotland, most of it comes from the States. Most of it comes from will be ex-bourbon barrels. Tends to get brought in largely used for what used to largely be used for grain, basically to get rid of all of those sweet flavors and all those uncontrollable spices and things that uh, we couldn't you couldn't taste any of the spirit behind. And then it'll eventually end up with malt. And the reason for that, for a company particularly like Diageo or a blending company, they're looking for kind of controllable flavors for their blends. And what that means is we have kind of, when we're buying stocks like this, I'll normally buy anywhere between 20 to 100 casks of any given make and year. So we're not cask hunters. When I started, I always thought that independent bottling was wandering around warehouses. You have to wander around with a glass and find a cask that looked really pretty and just open that one and it'd be perfect. Um, Mainly, this kind of whiskey is the best example. It's working with huge spreadsheets, and then getting samples. I toyed with the idea of picking up my camera then and showing you this room, but then my wife is next door and she'd be really embarrassed because I'm basically sitting in a pile of samples currently.
I want to
Um,
see. We won't tell your wife.
She's
so
asleep anyway.
There you go.
there you go.
Wow.
Right
Okay.
there. So yeah, so you kind of get, you'll buy, in the case of Ben Rennes, we were sitting on about, we would have purchased it when it was about 7 years old, and we will have had about 50 to 100 casks, give or take. And then my job is to slowly work through that stock, take samples, kind of go through, judge how bad the wood is, whether we need to change the wood, whether the spirit holds up anyway. And in the case of this, because it's got older wood, the spirit comes through, and as long as you don't get the certain flavors you might get off older wood, like particularly damp card. As long as you're not getting that, then you can kind of leave it to develop, and what you'll end up with is really expressing the kind of characters from the spirit rather than the wood. Um, and that's why in the case of this, you are going to get some kind of slightly more nutty flavors. You're going to get some hopefully kind of baked apple, maybe some kind of slightly kind of honeyed notes coming through, and a lot of that spirit driven rather than wood driven. Um, I think, as I said at the beginning, I've always kind of seen single malts of Scotland for a home for kind of spirit driven or classic distillery character bottlings. So we're not looking to go, well, hey, this is the only example of Ben Rennes, and isn't it crazy? It's in a wacky wine cask. What we're trying to say is, look, this is kind of the heart and soul of this distillery at this time. Guess the last thing to say on this one is it's bottled at 53.6%. It's not necessarily natural cask strength. We normally do a bit of reduction. That being said, this would have come out about 55%, give or take. The reason we do that is it tastes better, and it's that simple. So I've always seen our job as an independent bottler to present whiskey the best way. I've had this argument slash friendly conversation quite a few times with a previous employee and friend to pretty much everyone in this room, Joshua Hatton, and the difference between us and Single Cask Nation. They see their job as being cask finders who find the casks at the best point. I see my job as a creator and manager of stocks. So if I find something that drinks incredibly well, but it needs 2% reduction, then that's what I'm going to do. Um, I'd rather, you know, it's just a slightly different philosophy. Neither's right or wrong as long as the thing in the bottle tastes good at the end of the day. Um,
So, so I took this and I added some more water to it, if you will. But are you saying that you really believe that these whiskeys that you have here, they have been watered down enough that you shouldn't touch it, or
no, well, I believe that to my palate,
right?
they drink really well as they are. But the most fundamental belief is it's in your glass. So, and it's your whiskey. So at that point, you've purchased it. You do what you like.
Right.
But
No, I
what I never want to do is I never want to, if I try something and it tastes great, 2% with a 2% drop, it's a little bit spiky and a little bit harsh at its full cast strength. Then I don't want to put that in a bottle because then you'll open it up, drink it, and go, well, that's not good. And you might be one of these people who doesn't want to add water, which, each to their own. So I guess my possession is always that I have to put the best thing I can in the bottle so that what you taste for off the bat works. If you then add more water and find more in it, that's fantastic. You get more in it for your bottle. That's a great idea. I'm perpetually buying high strength whiskey on the basis that it's a great economic position, which is interesting in a country with really high tax based on alcohol strength. Um, but yeah, but it seems to work quite well.
but this one is I'm thoroughly enjoying this one.
Yeah, it's a good starter for 10, I hope.
Oh yeah, this is fantastic. Fantastic. How does that? So I understand the concept of an independent bottler, like you had mentioned, somebody who's a cask hunter who goes out and goes, "This is amazing. Let's buy this cask." What's the mentality when you're buying a 6 year? Oh, and I also understand the counter opposite of that, where you buy new make spirit and then you age it until it's perfect and then you let it out. But what's the mentality when you're tasting a 6 year old that you're gonna release as a 13-year old? Like, is it a numbers thing? Are you tasting it and you can tell that there's potential a couple of years down the line, and then you just wait and see? Like how does that play out?
It is a little bit of wait and see. So the first thing we work on is make and vintage. So you'll look at makes and you go, okay, great example being Ben Rinnes. So if I'm looking at Ben Rinnes 2006, I've got a really good idea in my head what that vintage, what was going on at that distillery at that time. I have tried lots of samples already. That's why I'm constantly buying other people's whiskey. It's a hard life. To try and work out what's going on at distilleries at certain times, to understand flavor profiles and to understand, frankly, what I like or what we think is pretty good and what's pretty bad. That helps you avoid some stocks. So basically, I've got a massive bias against some stuff and a massive bias towards other stuff based purely on make and the year it's being produced. It doesn't mean I won't take samples from things that shouldn't be good because you never know. Every dog has its day. Then when you're buying a parcel like this, you're working through it. So you'll be trying maybe if it's just 100 casks, you'll be trying 20 at a time. And then you make a judgment on that parcel. Okay, so this wood is performing quite well at this point. The spirit's showing really well, but maybe it's a bit hot. Maybe it feels like it could do with significant reduction or a lot of oxygen. Let's leave it for another 3 years and come back to it. And you normally set up cycles. So I've got a spreadsheet in the background, and all it's ever doing is tracking, going, okay, pull samples from this 2 more years, pull samples from this 2 more years, which is why I end up with far too much whiskey in my house. To the same extent, you might try something and, let's say on some old wood, you get this horrible wet card note. So then you're going, okay, I need to fix that. Or this spirit is particularly sulfuric, or this spirit has a profile that's not where we want it to be, and then you'll start a re-racking program. And once you started that, you have a completely different set of, when you're going to start drawing samples. So if you're putting into really active wood, you might pull every 6 months. You start to get a better idea of the types of wood you're using, which we can go into. And then that'll change again how often you're tasting it and your expectations, if that makes sense. So I'll have certain wood profiles that I expect to deliver flavor profiles within a year, 2 years, or 3 years, and then I've got other profiles where you're going, okay, this spirit really needs a long time. So great example being we work with a couple of different cooperages in Spain. One who's a fantastic cooperage, very large. They make great wood that when it's first used is very wood driven. It gives you kind of colors a bit like that after about 6 months to a year. So I know that if I'm using that, it's going to give you particularly kind of chocolate, ginger, those kind of notes really quickly. So if it's in a specific spirit style, you might say, okay, well, I want those flavors and I want it to deliver particularly for, as an example, Elmsweiler. I'm only saying that because that sample's for a blend that we're working on for Elmsweiler. And so you go, okay, check that in 6 months, check it in a year. To the same extent, if I was using it for something like this, the stock that you're trying now, and there are casks of Ben Rennes 2010 that we went, okay, that profile's nice. Let's go put it into sherry, but we'll put it into refill sherry and we'll go, okay, let's probably forget about it for 6 to 10 years to give ourselves a larger profile of stock available to us in the future. So that when Sam says to me, I really want some 25-year-old Ben Rennes, I have stuff that it is still developing. I'll also keep some like this. So there'll be stock like this. So you're going, leave that and come back to it every couple of years. Does that make sense? It sounds not scientific. Basically, we're not scientific. It's just lots of drinking. We should be far more scientific and professional.
It sounds like a tried and true method.
It's artistry. That's how that works.
No, Anna, you're so polite. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that Weston have a much more scientific view on how this works.
I have a question about a comment you said earlier. You were saying that, Ben Rennes switched from triple distilling to twice distillation, I think. That's what I heard. So if you were to compare kind of a similar aged product side by side, one triple and one double, what would be like differences in terms of tasting notes?
So for absolute clarity, they didn't really even do triple distilled. They kind of did 2.8 something, but we all hate maths, and it's probably really difficult to work out. The main difference is that you're going to get a much lighter spirit. So the more times you're still running past copper, the copper kind of works like a Brillo pad. So it's like capturing or rubbing out lots of nasties, particularly sulfurs, and phenols and heavy things. So the more times that your spirit runs over copper, the more kind of heavy notes you get rid of. So Ben Rennes went from being a relatively light, honestly quite hot spirit, to being a much more kind of nutty, richer character. So if you were looking at the profile in exactly the same wood, essentially those flavors would be exaggerated. So you would see more of that richness, nuttiness. You quite often in Ben Rennes get a kind of, well, more modern Ben Rennes, not exactly a sulfury note, but it's certainly a kind of almost a heavy meaty note in the spirit. It's not as pronounced as somewhere like Mortlach or Macallan, but it's there. It's a weight to it. Whereas in the earlier spirit, and you can taste it from 2006 stock or earlier, you get more fruit, but much lighter fruit. My experiences with Ben Rennes are limited to mature stock. But if you're ever over here, you should definitely ask Polly that because she tried both spirits, so she can tell you. Yeah, does that all make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Do you happen to know, did she change it so it was like wider cuts, or how did she get the heavier, oilier mouthfeel that you're talking about? Or was it just simply because it was 2.8, 2 runs instead of 2.8?
My understanding is it was largely the process change in terms of how they were using the stills. I think they went to basically a more balanced distillation method. So a lot of distilleries you'll go to in Scotland have essentially an even set of stills. So you'll go from your wash still into your spirit still, from your spirit still into your receiver, and Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt, and then you'll go to. Sorry, does that phrase mean anything to anyone here? No, good, okay.
I know Bob. Who's your aunt?
Fanny. She wasn't actually. My aunt's name is Helen. Doesn't help you at all. You'll go to some distilleries and they'll have an uneven number of stills, or you get someone like Mortlach and they've got this stupid tiny still. And what that means is you end up running through the stills in a slightly different method. So you'll gather up your spirit from your wash still, and some of it will go into one still that's bigger and some will go into a smaller still. And we end up counting it a random number of times. So instead of saying it's triple distilled, it's like 2.8. And all that means is you're adding additional copper. Or in some case, it means you're reducing the amount of copper because you're putting it for a stupid little still. So that just changes the amount of essentially impurities, nasties that you're getting rid of. Personally, I'm a big fan of those nasties. We should leave them all in. So that's why pot still whiskey.
Actually, if anybody is interested in geeking out, I just looked it up. Wikipedia has the old distilling process. What is the 2.8? At least that's what they're saying that they know. If you look for the Ben Rennes distillery, they go over how the 2.8 was done, but they don't mention the new change.
No, well, yeah, Wikipedia, rubbish. Hasn't even been updated since 2008.
What the warm tub effect do the difference between warm tub and the other cooling for the flavor?
Similar in terms of it's essentially a less efficient form of condensing. And this should all be caveated by a phrase a friend of mine from the Netherlands once said: a good distiller can use their kit however they want. So, you could change all this if you wanted to. But in general, worm tubs don't get basically your condensing tends to be more severe, so you tend to basically not have as much time with the copper, whereas in a shunt tube condenser you can basically reduce down your spirit to, you can reduce your, oh God, I'm losing my mind. You can reduce your vapor to spirit slower, so you get more copper contact, so you get a lighter, fresher spirit. So worm tubs will tend to make heavier spirits. That's not always true because at some distilleries like Royal Nagar, for instance, they warm the water in the worm, which leads to more gentle condensing, so you get more copper contact. But in general, we would say worm tubs would also tend to lead to having a heavier spirit. Interestingly, the only company, bar one or two, bar two, the only company that regularly use worms is Diageo. They've got loads, like Ben Rennes, like Mortlach, Dalwhinnie. In fact, the list is pretty much endless. But yeah, it tends to lead to heavier spirits. But again, as much as like blenders like me will often talk about casks, we'll talk about how important, frankly, we are, because we're all big prima donnas. The most important person is the distiller. Like people like Polly, the changes they can make in their process. So the example being, if you had worms and you went, you know what, I really want to lighten my spirit, you could look at changing the water temperatures in your worms. You could slow down the distillation. You could something we did here at Tormore, one of the things Polly did when she turned up was over the weekend, we open up the stills. That simple, just open them up, literally leave the doors open. And we just suddenly got a much fruitier spirit. I mean, it's small changes, but just understanding how the copper works and how these small processes can change spirit quality or character. So actually the most important people, pretty much always the people running the distillery. And largely they're not really looking at what you guys, and indeed I am looking at, which is what it'll taste like in 13 years' time in wood, because frankly they don't know. They're just looking to make a specific character dictated by, we want a fruity character for this blend in the future. We want a more sulfur character. We want a more nutty character. And they can change small bits of that process and control small bits of that process to make a particular flavor. Wow, I probably went off on a tangent there, didn't I? I'm not sure how helpful that was.
That's okay, Ali. We like it.
Anyway, we all liking the whiskey. Round.
One of the best Ben Nevis I've ever had. I think we're moving on to the Blair Athol at this point.
Yeah, we're going to go on to Blair Athol 16-year-old. So distilled in 2008. For those who know, Blair Athol is, I mean, to me, it's in basically southern Scotland at this point. It's in Perthshire, in Pitlochry. It's incredibly pretty. Like, it is probably from the outside one of the prettiest buildings. It is all covered in greenery, and it looks kind of almost enchanted. So definitely, if you're ever traveling to Scotland, it's incredibly easy to get to, and worth visiting just because it looks nice.
Are they still closed? I know last when I was there in 22, they were still closed.
I think
No, you're thinking Edgedower.
Yeah, Edgedower's closed. Blair Athol is open to the public still.
Yeah, Blair Athol never closed.
Okay.
Yeah. Blair Athol it's a big, well, again, it's another workhorse distillery. Most of the spirit, well, historically, the spirit goes into a blend called Bell's. I don't know if you guys get Bell's. It's mainly a UK blend sold in supermarkets for.
Who owns Blair Athol? Is that another Diageo?
It's another Diageo malt. Yeah. And they make a particularly kind of heavy spirit. Now, don't let me put you off your whiskey, but internally they call it Blair Awful, because as a spirit character, it's just so fat and heavy. Which, for me, I see spirits like that, and they need one of two things. They either need time, so late teens, this kind of age, or relatively active wood. You're one of the things I said. You're looking at makes and vintages. You look at makes like Blair Athol, and the first thing you think is, okay, what profile are we in? Okay, we're in refill wood. Okay, we probably need to leave this for a while. We'll probably come back to this in its latter teens, early 20s. Or you're looking at it going, okay, do I need to look at particularly active wood, sherry, even new charred oak, which will help temper some of those flavors. It's considered to be a somewhat sulfuric spirit. So using stuff like, more heavily charred oak works really well because you knock those flavors out, and you're left with these kind of more nutty, weighty, malty characters. In this case, it's a refilled barrel, sorry. So it's a ex-bourbon barrel being used for whiskey before. So it's not quite as big as a hoggy. Hogshead holds about 250 litres of alcohol. Barrel holds 200 litres of alcohol. And then in this case, it's also not yielded massively well. So we only got 178 bottles. That normally means that the cask was a little bit more open, so we lost a bit more liquid. It could also mean it was sat in a particularly damp environment, sometimes completely soaking wet. But what that also means is that you tend to get more oxygen in the cask, and that helps to develop certain flavors. So it'll certainly take some of the kind of vanillins we're getting and build them into more kind of herbaceous notes. Which I find, for me, on these kind of heavier spirits, makes for really elegant whiskies. So although they're big, they just tend to have this kind of sense of elegance and weight and kind of character, which hopefully is what you guys are getting here. I know I think of it. I thought this whiskey was kind of buttered biscuits and all these kind of rich caramels coming through.
It's definitely buttery for sure, but it has a spice on the finish, almost a bitterness on the finish. I've started getting that on quite a few whiskeys. I wonder if it's my palate that's just developed that sensitivity. Do you know where like the bitterness comes from?
Mm-hmm.
If you taste it at all?
I mean, I do get bitterness on certain whiskies. I
White
will also
pepper.
say that my palate's on, like, I don't know about you guys, but time of day, what I've eaten. And I go through phases where I remember having one day I tried probably like 200 random samples and everything was awful. Everything tasted like wet dog. Um, so I kind of wrote off everything and I went back into the room a week later and the environment had completely changed. Mainly it was to do with humidity. So it was very humid the first day I tried and it wasn't so humid the next day. And everything showed a lot better. So sometimes it's as simple as just the room you're in and changing that.
I get a lot of lemon pith on this one, Vadim, so I don't think you're off on it.
Yeah, I agree, but water really changes that for me. And then I taste all that creaminess that you're talking about without that bitter finish.
Yeah, a few drops of water really mellowed out the spiciness and the like Anna said, yeah, lemon pith is definitely a good where the bitterness is coming from for sure.
I find it interesting because I with a little water, I love the nose better with some water, but the palate I like without water, and maybe some shortbread would be good with this.
Well, we've got a really lovely factory up the road, so I can get you a load of walkers and send it out to you if you like.
This is the best.
Henrik, Jane has fresh homemade shortbread cookies, so you should have to run over and come back.
Yeah, I had fresh shortbread cookies. Had.
Did Henrik eat them all? That makes sense.
Oh, I did.
You got a whole box of them. There you go. He
They
doesn't.
also sponsor my son's football team, so as far as I'm concerned, they're the best.
Which one?
My son plays for Abelauer Juniors, and they're sponsored by Walkers. I'm not entirely sure it's the healthiest sponsor, but
That's great.
That's awesome, though.
Do we know? Did you say what kind of cask this one was in?
there's a refill bourbon barrel.
So no sherry influence at all?
No sherry influence at all, no. But it does seem to be a relatively active barrel, so it's probably not been used a vast amount of times. I mean, we kept the barrel actually. We kept it and used it for something else afterwards. You tend to see if you see barrels, even refill barrels, they tend to be younger. There was a change. I'm not entirely sure what year it was. So there was a point where most bourbon barrels were shipped to us as staves because it was cheaper, and then rebuilt into hogsheads. Today we actually shift most things as full barrels. Just the price of cooperage versus shipping makes more sense to do it that way. But I'm in two minds. I mean, I love refill barrels for long aging. They work really well. At the same time, my absolute favorite cask from a laying down stock into like laying down new make is a first fill hogshead, which is quite an expensive way of doing it. It just means you've got slightly less space. So you got more wood impact, which obviously in this case has definitely delivered lots of that kind of richness coming through, that kind of butteriness. That's probably where it's coming from. And then in terms of, you've not messed around too much. You do have infill left in. So we kind of, infill's a funny one because we're not legally, we're not allowed to add anything to Scotch whiskey apart from colouring, which obviously we don't. But you get up to kind of 10 to 12% of liquid held in the wood. So, infill, it seeps out. So the way it works is the previous contents, whether that's bourbon or even Scotch or wine or sherry, whatever, is pushed into the wood. And then as you leave whiskey in it, the whiskey comes in and out of the wood as it breathes. And obviously you're getting some of that in there. So these kind of barrels, you're getting some sweetness from the previous content, essentially. If anyone tells the SWA that, they get very upset because we obviously don't add anything to Scotch whiskey. That would be illegal.
Are there any distilleries we should? You said you have a soft spot for some distilleries you love and some you don't care for. What are some of your favorite ones? Because apparently my palate agrees with your palate. I think last time you told me about Tormore, and since then I've sought out a few bottles and absolutely loving it.
So Tormore, I'm obviously massively biased, but I've also tried probably at this point more Tormore than almost anyone on the world. Needs must when the devil drives. Tormore's very, very much a light fruit driven, kind of stone fruit driven spirit. So if you love these kind of more elegant things, it's a great spirit character. We're making some subtle changes to it here just to increase some of the fruit in the spirit. And then we're changing a lot of the wood profile that we've got on site. I can add some flows. I mean, you can obviously the big ones like Klein Leash, etc. Everyone goes to some of the ones that are kind of recent. I guess what would be, I don't know what a really understated one is. Probably Linkwood. I adore Linkwood. I could drink Linkwood every day of my life and never be unhappy. So it's got this kind of zesty, appley character. It's very best. You can basically take a Linkwood, add soda, and drink apple ties without all the sugar. I mean that's got to be good for you, right? Sugar's definitely bad for you, and there's some evidence that alcohol might not be. I'm not a doctor, but it sounds like a healthy option. So Linkwood, I think it's certainly one of these kind of underrated distilleries that people don't look at. Yeah.
Is that an Impex bottling?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be if I couldn't be some sort of Linkwood Impex come together for this group. I think that you guys would appreciate it. This bottle's amazing.
Nice.
You've had that. I think I'd be ahead of it, Ian.
I have. It's delicious.
I agree. I love Linkwood.
And actually, maybe you'll disagree with me. This next whiskey probably fits in that character, into that category of distilleries no one talks about, mainly because I think it's owned by a bulk blender. So we're going to go on to Macduff, which is now a reserve cask range. Macduff is certainly a distillery that I never looked at. Right? As a drinker, not on my radar. Was never searching out bottles of Macduff. And we bought. So when we're buying stock, it's not like you turn up and you go, oh yeah, so I'd like to buy 100 casks of Klein Niche. I'll have 50 casks of Springbank. Can I get 10 casks of Lefroy? Oh, and could they all be from the 90s, please? It sadly doesn't work like that. So what you tend to do is you'll be buying bits where it'll be, okay, so we'll either have regular contracts for spirit like some of the Diageo makes or Beam makes. but then you're also getting parcels sent through from brokers, and they'll often like have some stuff like shiny stuff. Oh, I really like that make. And in it, they'll also have other makes that you're like, all right, if I have to. And Macduff, for the longest time for me, was one of those, all right, well, we'll take it. Okay, I haven't really thought about it. And in the last year, I mean, this will be, we kind of picked out a few different parcels. Tends to be younger, kind of 10, 12-year-old, either in sherry or in kind of first fill, so quite active casks. And it's amazing. It's like dense, heavy, fudgy, fruity wonderfulness. I mean, it's all rich and rambunctious. It's not. I don't think Macduff is a massively subtle whiskey, but my God, it can be drinkable. So we bottled this, which is from some first of all sherry butts. So we bought it in these casks. We didn't re-rack it or anything. It happened to come in some pretty good wood. I've just done a parcel. I'm just doing a couple of parcels of first of all bourbon. Honestly, it's like, I mean, you basically could be drinking bourbon. It's just rich, fantastically sweet. I mean, all I want to do is basically down it in lots of ginger, but because I'm a horrendous person, and drink pints of it. But Macduff is one of those distilleries that I don't think gets talked about at all. But it seems to make a really fantastically thick spirit that just works with really active wood. So this bottling is in the reserve cask range. These are where we do small batches. So when we started life, everything was single casks because that's what we did. And then any excuse I've got for adding things together to make other things, I'll do. It makes my day more interesting. Keeps people thinking I'm busy and working hard. Otherwise, they ask me to do other things. So we created this range called reserve casks where we would add 2, 3, 4 casks together. We reduced the strength to 48%. 48%, you know, I could give you loads of reasons why we reduced to 48 and not to 46 or not to 50. But the real simple truth is I like drinking at 48%. I find it really approachable. I find that the higher alcohol than say 43 or 46 just allows for a bit more expression, allows the whiskey to linger a bit more on your palate. But at the same time, it's kind of chuggable. I could probably put it in a pint glass and it would still sit there perfectly well, rather than having it in a Glencairn or a Nothing glass. So the hope with the reserve cask was to create a range that was more approachable, essentially, and a gateway drug to independent bottling. Certainly one of the things I always like the idea that you could take people from drinking something like Balvenie Double Wood, you could give them something like this and say, look, it's a much richer, denser version of the thing you were drinking. It's a bit more interesting. Oh, and it's a distillery you've never heard of. Come into our wonderful world where you can then discover all these distilleries and all these different styles and move them slowly into kind of the world of single casks where it's all changing all the time. Well, that was a lot of talking.
No, the reserve cask is how that was my gateway to single malt to Scotland. It also helps that it's, you know, because it's a little lower ABV and it's a bigger batch. It's more affordable price wise as well. And we had an event. Speaking of Kleinleach, a few friends came over and everybody brought a bottle of Kleinleach and we tasted a bunch. And at this point, we're all chasing cask strength, single cask, all that jazz. And out of like 4 or 5 Kleinleaches, my favorite one was the reserve cask at 48%. And I loved it. I ended up buying 2 bottles. So, yeah, that's
yeah. So certainly doing this kind of tasting and trying all high strength and interesting individual casks is always fun. But sometimes you just want to drink a nice whiskey. And hopefully that's where kind of reserve cask fits. It kind of enough of a place where you can discover something that's a bit different, but you can also just drink it and you know, not be quite as worried about the fact that it's 55%. So yeah, I really hope you enjoy this, because it's a spirit. You know, it was interesting looking at kind of the distilleries that you wouldn't normally think of, but this is definitely one that's kind of popped into my brain in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. Before that, I really wasn't looking at Macduff at all, and it was just chance. What do you guys think?
This is so good. We did a weird thing over the summer where we'd have melon fresh out of the garden, and you'd cut it up in wedges and sprinkle it lightly with salt. And that's what makes me think of this, is like a honeydew, the green melon with a little bit of salt on it. It's got that weird, creamy, slightly fruity flavor with that layer of saltiness underneath it. It's really quite lovely.
Yeah, I get like a salted caramel on some baked pears and apples kind of thing, similar vein. But I love the nose on this. We've been talking about this in the chat. The nose is amazing.
Yeah, I could wear this as perfume.
Is Macduff always that salty? I don't remember it to be that salty.
So I didn't really hear that one. I also didn't have to
Sorry,
listen.
I asked if Macduff is always that salty, because I don't remember it to be that salty.
I mean, well, you don't tend to get salt off spirit anyway. So if you are getting it, it tends to be a character from wood. There are some, that's a debatable point, massively arguable.
Wait, say more. Don't run away from that, because this is a classic nerd debate. Do you find salty elements in spirit? Do you think it comes from the wood? Are people crazy? Are the other people right?
Technically, everyone's crazy because there's no
Yeah,
sodium in
fair
whiskey,
enough.
right? So technically, it's all nuts. I don't believe personally that it's environmental factors, because most Kalila tastes, well, we're going to try one later, has a wonderful kind of coastal nature to it, and almost all of it is matured somewhere between Glasgow and Edinburgh, with almost none of it on Islay. So I don't know. I think it must be an atmosphere thing in distillation, but then you've got coastal whiskies that aren't salty at all, and I don't know. It's one of the wonderful things that we can't prove. Creates debate, and it's one of the kind of microclimates. And I don't think, by microclimates, I don't. Oh God, controversial, Anna. Careful now. I'm going to go into an area that I think we've had email exchanges on. I am a great believer in the French philosophy of terroir. Now, by that, I mean, I think the former owner of the dodgy Irish distillery that went bust last year is an idiot who can't understand romance or subtlety, because he's English, and English people are widely devoid of any romance, whereas the French only have romance. Neither's perfect, right? So the idea is that place affects flavor, but place includes people, and so whiskies end up representing their place and the people that make it, because there are traditions set in place and that really don't change very much. So I think a lot of that kind of coastal element will largely come from spirit, and largely it's driven by just certain nuances in the process that are inherited through tradition, which is a much closer tie to terroir in Burgundy than it is to certain slightly stupid theories about growing barley in certain fields and processing it through giant mash filters and hoping for the best. That's good, wasn't it? Didn't swear. Very well behaved tonight.
Yeah, I'm just to hear what Anna has to say about it, because the video showing Anna was hilarious in itself.
I have a glass face. I do apologize. No, but actually, so it was the first part of the sentence that I was concerned about, but then I agree with all of what you're saying. Because it's not just terroir of the land, but that's part of it, but that's only part of it. We talk about provenance, and that's another word that we like to use sometimes for that terroir because people get all up in arms about the use of the word terroir. But it's not just the land, but also if you look at peat, that's literally of the land. Wood is literally growing. So if you want to go down those technicalities, sure. But I think processes and yeah, divining kind of just the environment of your distillery and where people are doing if they're doing it by hand, the cuts and all those things, and how they're blending it, like all that stuff together. It's a culture. So I think that I agree with Ollie 100% on this. So yeah.
To the more specific question, no idea where the salty flavors come from. Couldn't tell you. It could quite, in this case, it could quite happily come from the wood. I mean, so the wood itself just says sherry butt, and the reason it says that is because we don't know. Like we don't buy the cask. We, in fact, I had this conversation today as we're desperately trying to rationalize our cask descriptors, and we live in a really weird world. So as an independent bottler, you buy stock from other people. They put it into cask and they give you their cask descriptions. Now, some distillers are really accurate, and some are not. So, and when I fill wood that we're buying, I keep everything. So, I've got a cask code. It's made up of 8 to 10 characters. Each character has a meaning. So I keep everything from the infill, so the wine, the bourbon. So when we're receiving barrels in, I'm looking at which bourbon was in it. If I'm receiving when I'm buying sherry casks, I work directly with certain bodegas. I look at who the cooper is. I record that information because every cooper works slightly different. If I have information about their process, toasting, charring, etc., I'll keep that. And so if I put a full cask description that I've filled here, it doesn't fit on any labels. And most of the information will seem completely innocuous to most people, but it allows me to build recipes because I can find things that are always the same with either the cooper, the wine producer, the style of wood, the species of wood, etc. And then the other example will be something like this. It says sherry butt. And we have absolutely no idea whether that is an Oloroso sherry butt. Is it Pedro Jimenez sherry butt? Is it a sherry butt? Is it a butt that actually came from Montier and they just called it a sherry butt? Even if you said it was Oloroso, as a great example, there's a wonderful bodega just on the border between St. Luca and Jerez, and one half of their bodega they make manzanilla, and in the other half they don't. Some of the wines do have a salty tang, some don't. And it's quite possible that you're buying casks that happen to be seasoned, or you could be buying historic wood that happen to be lying in this bodega, and it might give you a more coastal note. And the reality is, an independent bottler, you'll never know that. Like you can't phone up. And even if you did phone up the distillery and say, on this date, what did you fill into? Good chance they're just going to say sherry butts, because they're not following that, and they're probably buying from a range of different suppliers, whoever's cheapest on the day. And depending on how the cooper works, they might be using older historic wood, they might be using wood they bought and laid down, just depends. And they don't necessarily track it. So some of the nuances, particularly in independent bottling, I mean, some of it, this is maybe why we all love it so much. There's these unknown bits that are uncontrollable, that we just have to accept that on this particular parcel of whiskey, it tasted like this and it was great. And then you look, if you're like me, you start looking at those and you look for consistencies among them. So among this, and then you can build up an idea that this is the spirit profile that's delivering this, or this is the wood profile that's delivering this. The flip side of that is then you turn into someone like me and you try and control every tiny element in the hope that you don't have this problem. Basically, go on.
Sorry. As a consumer, I guess I always assumed, especially for Scotch, that many times after a barrel or barrels have been emptied, they get reused, right? They might have some work done to them and then reused. What happens to the barrels when they are, the ownership of an independent bottler? Do you sell them back or return them to the distillery, or what? Do they get recycled and reused?
So there are two ways it can work. You can buy the spirit without the wood, which sounds absolutely madness, but you rent the wood like a kind of leasing vessel. We don't do that. We always buy the cask, but it is an option. And so when you empty it, the casks go back to the distillery owner or the original owner of the spirit. We don't. We always buy the wood. That allows us the freedom to, if for example, with these butts from Macduff, which were really good quality, they delivered a great product. So we'll then use them as refill sherry butts. A cask has a lifespan of roughly 60 years, 70 years, realistically speaking, before it basically is a sieve. And then at that point, it's less useful to you. So we, in that time, they'll have different purposes. Currently, we tend not to use casks that are much older than 30 or 40, and I'll be selling those on. So, most of them get sold off to cooperages, and they'll either go back into the system as very old refill. So depending on the market, this is where it becomes really not very romantic. So I apologize profusely. But as an example, for the last 2-3 years, the bourbon market has been a bit of a mess. Essentially, a lot of companies wanted premium bourbon. It shrunk down supply. So that increased the price. We went from a price of about $70 for a refill bourbon barrel to $280. And it's now dropped to $235 per barrel. And what happens in those instances is in Scotland, you go, okay, well, I can't afford to just buy all these bourbon barrels, so you start using more refill. And I was actually getting as much as kind of £50 for really old wood, which was great for me because I didn't want to use it. And then if it's not good enough, so if it goes to the cooperage and they look at it and they go, actually, I can't use that, they'll turn it into a plant pot. At this point, I would take you outside, but it's pitch black, so you wouldn't see my plant pots anyway.
Ollie, has the softening market started to make life a little bit easier for you with respect to finding casks, sourcing casks, going and talking to Diageo and the like, and having them be not total D-bags?
I've never found Diageo that bad to work with, actually. They've always been really one of the easier ones. Consistent business. It's what shareholders want, apparently. Yes and no. I mean, there's certainly a lot more stock on the market. It's a lot easier to buy aged malt at the moment. We have maybe a different priority to what we used to. I buy unsurprisingly a lot of tall malt. So it's certainly easier, but it's swings and roundabouts, also more difficult to sell, right? So, but yeah, it's definitely at the moment it's a buyer's market for mature whiskey. The wood market is still a complete mess. I mean, I've seen the first price reductions in sherry casks in about 2 years, but when you're going from 1,200 euros down to 1,000 euros, it really doesn't feel like that big a deal. Probably should feel like a bigger deal than it does. And the same with bourbon barrels. If you were at $70 and you're now at $280 and it goes down to $230, the celebration feels pretty short-lived. Because you're buying, in our case, we fill somewhere in the region of 6,000 casks a year, so it's a relatively expensive habit. So yes, it's an interesting time to be working in whiskey.
How do you feel about Brown-Forman shutting down their cooperage?
Yeah, we didn't deal much with wood out of Brown-Forman. It's obviously affects the market in terms of first fill barrels, and in terms of refill, I mean, they still sell that out. Like it's all got to go somewhere. So I more watch things like I'm more interested in what you guys are drinking on your day to day, right? So the bit of the American market I watch is how much 4-year-old bourbon are you drinking? Could you drink more of that? Drink a lot of that, please. Yeah, if you could start buying those 4.5 liter things that you guys sell. Buy loads of those. Because the more barrels emptied, the cheaper the world is for me. But I think it's clear that we're in a really difficult space. You know, I don't know if you read about Glenglasser being mothballed, and it's a bit of a reactionary time. Big companies are under a lot of pressure on this, reporting their figures, and I think that's leading to a lot of reactions that are maybe a little bit too severe. But we'll see. I mean, I'm very lucky. I work for a small family business, and we're not protected, but it's a bit of we have different considerations, and we look maybe slightly more long term, less short term. Yeah, mainly all of this stuff. I just feel bad for the guys and their jobs, and that's you can look at the brutal business side and you can say, oh, how does this affect me? Obviously, I worry about the price of wood and I worry about the price of spirit. But the main thing I worry about is someone doesn't have a job. That's pretty rough and pretty horrible. Grant, can we get on to something more positive? Should we talk about Daluin? Let's talk about Daluin. So the next whiskey is Daluin 12-year-old. That is right. I've got that right. Yeah, I'm just checking I'm in the right place. Yeah, car 790. And Daluin is probably one of the most interesting. I'm actually going to be really cheeky. I'm going to sneak peek at my sheet in the back, my big list of casks in the background, right? And the reason I'm going to do that is because Daluin makes about 4 different makes, and they don't tell you that. Right? So Daluin is a big factory distillery, and traditionally it makes a heavy sulfuric spirit. So if any of you have seen the Flora and Fauna bottling, with everyone thinks of it being this kind of rich, meaty dram, and it's kind of classed in that group with Mortlach and Macallan and all of those. However, they also make 3 other spirit types. They have attempted to make waxy. They make grassy, and they also make nutty. And when you buy the casks, you get it'll have the distillery name, and then in brackets it has a letter behind it, and that tells you what spirit character they're on. And all they're doing is they're changing cut points. They're changing how much spirit they put in the stills. The waxy was slightly different because they actually at one point tried to take some green gunk from Clination, stick it in their faint receiver, and hope for the best. Not sure how that worked. They change fermentation profile. So they change all these things, and then they run a campaign to make a spirit character. And this particular cask, and the reason we've got it in the lineup where it is their nutty profile. So you won't see that anywhere on our label. You won't see that. You probably won't come across it on any independent bottling label, but it gives you something to look for. So, yeah, it's a slightly. The idea is that they shorten the ferment. So it's normally at Daluin they use quite the Diageo term long fermentation, which is probably not that long, but longer than their average. And for this, they will have cut the ferment slightly, and basically they're trying to build up a nuttier profile in the spirit. And they do that to feed into blends, right? So it's all about replacing spirit from distilleries that are closed at certain times. So Daluin, they see it as quite a versatile plant, and if the example of the waxy spirit, for instance, they started trying to make waxy at Dalywen in 2014 through 15 and 16. And they still run it today. So I'm actually, like, the last couple of years I filled at Dalywen, I always fill waxy. And they do that to essentially supply some extra client leash is the idea, right? Because they need it for Johnny Walker. Never found their waxy to be massively waxy, but I find it quite interesting. This particular one is a sherry butt, probably a refill sherry butt. It just says sherry butt on the sheet, but it's not massively dark in color. It was a very handy cask in that it didn't lose very much. So that's, I think, why you do get all this kind of multi-grainy kind of nuttiness there. You don't get vast amounts of big heavy fruit. For me, this was more even on the kind of baked stone fruit than it was on the kind of classic sherry side. It is also pretty pokey in terms of the alcohol, so 58.9%. We didn't reduce, we just left it at cask strength. So do try it with water. So it might be on the hotter side.
I don't hear as much about Scotch distilleries playing with different yeast strains. Is that not a thing? Because I know a lot of American distillers do that, and sometimes even will sell you like 4 roses side by side to try different yeast strains.
So they do. It is it's slightly different philosophy, and it has an interesting and long history. So most distillers will work on kind of traditional distillers yeast. Now, distilling yeast kind of originated in the 1920s. Up until then, Scotch whisky got most of its yeast from breweries. So what they do is they go to a brewery and they do this spent yeast from a local brewery, which was great as long as you had local breweries. But if you're on the island of Islay, your local brewery's in Glasgow. So you would take that yeast, you put it in a cask, and you transfer it on a boat, and loads of bacteria would get in, and you'd create mad, oily, tropically fruit things. Which is, it's why one of the many reasons why lowland whiskies were traditionally lighter. This is almost getting back to terroir, if you like, but because you were much closer to where the yeast was coming from. That changed through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and into the 70s, where Distillers Company Limited, now Diageo, created what is now considered to be kind of the forebear of the main distilling yeast that we're using in Scotland. And they were looking at yield, right? So they're looking to get the best yield from their barley. Doesn't mean there aren't different flavors being involved in these strains, but they are very much about how you can get the most amount of alcohol for your money. So most distillers will use distiller's yeast from one of the major suppliers, so whether that's Maori or Lallemand, and all these guys they're making very similar strains, right? So they will some give them really fancy names, but essentially it's all the same. Now today, yeast has become a much bigger conversation. It kind of everything changed through the 90s. We didn't. You see, nobody in Scotch tells you these things because, frankly, they didn't think it was that important. But as an example, Allied distillers up until around 1997 ran at least a proportion of spent, so used brewer's yeast in most ferments, including at Tormore. So you would pitch a distiller's yeast essentially to get your alcohols, and then you'd pitch a bit of spent brewer's yeast for character and consistency of character. They tended not to change that. That changed in Scotland, not out of efficiency, which you'll sometimes hear from some really grumpy Scottish people building small distilleries in the Kingdom of Fife. It changed largely because, in the 90s, people in their 20s and 30s drank more lager than beer. So, it's a hateful generation. It's my older brother's generation. Unfeeling bastards. who didn't like any flavour. And the end result is all the breweries going to close down. And then, the example today, I tried to buy spent yeast for Tormore and I was laughed at. There isn't a brewery left in the UK big enough making ale to provide yeast for us because we're so big. So today, you now work with companies like Maori. We use, as an example, we run two campaigns. We ran a campaign where we supply spirit to Chivas Brothers. We use a very sexy sounding yeast strain called MX Plus, which is a high performance distiller's yeast that will work at slightly higher temperatures. It's a wonderful chicken and egg situation due to global warming. Everything's getting hotter, so you need yeast strains that will survive slightly higher heat. And as you're doing that, you're obviously making more heat, making more gas, and putting that into the atmosphere, which drives the temperature up. So we've got all these yeast strains developed to work at these slightly higher temperatures, but they tend to deliver slightly different esters, or even actually less esters in general. So when we're producing spirit for ourselves at Tormore, we actually moved back to a distiller's yeast called Pinnacle, which was the Pinnacle in the kind of 90s and early 2000s. And now we actually add in an additional dried yeast, which is a brewer's yeast. It's used by small brewers around the UK, and we pitch that alongside the distiller's yeast. So in short, it's definitely a conversation. It's just not one that anyone's willing to really talk about in any massively meaningful way currently, apart from some very small producers who some of which are even going back to using spent yeast, transferring it in cask, and enjoying all the wonderful lactic acid that creates, which can taste great, can also be an abomination. So 50-50 which way that goes. That was a lot of chat, wasn't it? Jeez.
Ollie, what are speaking of abominations?
Yeah.
You've told us some of the things that you are particular towards. What are some consistent abominations that you try to avoid?
I can't drink Auchentoshan. Genuinely. In the world.
No one can. Don't worry about it.
Auchentoshan, Jura, Fettican. I mean, look, you can find the list online. You just go onto any whiskey meme board and you'll see them. Yes. Certain distilleries where you get offered them, you're like, thanks. Great. I've bottled good Jura. There's been some good Jura. That's why I say every dog has its day. Every now and again, you're like, okay. But yeah, Auchentoshan, no. Generally bonded over my wife over a hatred of Auchentoshan. Seems like
there you go. Bringing people together.
Yeah. I had a bottling the other day that wasn't awful. That was in the Highlander, and Tatsuya bottled it for the Highlander, and he said to me, "No, try it." Oh, Jesus. It was fine. After someone's giving you
there he goes. Sam, how's that one?
Well, if you try it, you might change your mind about Hackintosh. I did.
Okay.
Whiskey Sponge has a great description on one of their bottlings, and it says it's unlike any other Auchentoshan ever because it tastes good.
Yeah.
And perhaps that is the role of IPs for Auchentoshan.
That's exactly why we brought it in, because it doesn't reflect any profile of the distillery. If you don't mind me asking, speaking of romance, what's the deal behind the label design?
So we've gone through various label iterations, although we haven't changed it in a long time. And when I took over SMoS, I wanted to change the label because I'd spent years working in shops and I couldn't sell them because no one could see any of the details. So we knew we had to make the distillery a little bit more obvious. And this is really sad. Skinner and I sat looking at a computer screen all night, looking at labels we liked, and we discovered that essentially we're 5-year-old children and we like pictures. So we asked our designer if he could draw a picture of a distillery. So he does they're all hand sketched, every single one. So he goes and hand sketches each distillery, so that you can see what they look like. That seemed like a great idea until there's certain distilleries that you hand sketch and you look at it and go, ooh, yeah, That's not as pretty as we thought. So he has license to add trees and bushes where you want to hide stuff. So yeah, so it's an artist's interpretation so that Scotland always looks nice. Because of course it does. It's tricky to make brutalist 60s architecture look particularly good.
I just realized that each label is different based on the distillery. That did not hit me until just now.
Right, guys, let's move on because I just realized it's 4:30 in the morning for me, so I've got to be up and go for a run to raise some more money in the next 3 hours.
Time your runs now without what is it? All about whiskey. Without the solid 30-minute
30
conversation.
minutes. Well, yeah, I mean, it turns out I'm also massively unhealthy, so my runs are more like 35 to 40 minutes, but
Just like that podcast.
yeah, just yeah, yes, I need to make sure I get to bed in the next half an hour. So we're going to move on to Altmore, 15-year-old. Altmore has an official bottling. Have you guys all tried that? It's a perfectly nice whiskey. Like it's a perfectly lovely thing. This is not like that. This is definitely leaning into the cask more than anything. So this is distilled in 2008, aged 15 years, full maturation in a sherry butt that yielded only 422 bottles, which isn't too bad. I mean, it's not the worst. The one thing to be wary of is it came out of cask at 60.7%. So it's not light on the alcohol. It went in at a very high strength. So we did a little bit of, believe it or not, a little bit of water reduction. And the reason this is a lot of timing, like 2008 financial crisis, money short, don't want to spend it. So what you tend to do is you put your whiskey into cask at a much higher strength because then you have to buy less wood, right? So it's a cost game. But
were they going up to 70? Because what is it, 63.5 normally? Were they 70, 72?
No, so it will come off. I mean, I don't actually know what it comes off at Altmore. I'd imagine it's coming off 68 to 69%. We come off at Tullamore, we're coming off at 68.5, give or take. We come off the stills. Don't get many distilleries come off much over 70. 70 is kind of the peak for single malt, at least. And so yeah, you'll put the cask at the strength that comes off the still, or the tanker strength. And that obviously allows you to save money. However, it changes your extracts quite a lot. You tend not to get as many wood sugars, and it can be quite severe on tannin. So if you're putting in something like sherry, you tend to get a lot of body, a lot of texture. Sometimes it doesn't work. I used to think that it was all measurable. So I used to tell people, oh, if you put it in a high strength and you leave it for an extra 10 or 15 years, it'll work itself out. And what I've discovered since we bought Tullamore is that is not true at all. If you put it in a high strength, it's a game of chance. Sometimes it works well, and sometimes it does not. All you're doing is you're increasing the extremities. So we've got casks of Tullamore distilled in the 90s, early 90s, put to cask at 68%, and some of them are like massive fruit bombs, and some of them are absolutely dreadful and taste like plasticine. And you can adjust that with water, so you can reduce the strength and put back to wood. And then that allows you to control extracts a bit better, so you can then put it to bourbon and essentially extract more water solubles that carry vanillins and all the sweet, lovely things, and then that'll help develop your spirit. You can also add water to it before bottling, which is what we did, and leave it and rest it, and that helps to balance out some of the more kind of severe flavors, which is what a lot of companies do, including Macallan, for example. They'll reduce in tank for an extended length of time to try and to balance out these spices. Technically, it's illegal. to do that, which we found out recently. But as it turns out that everybody, including Diageo, William Grant's, LVMH, every single Scotch whisky company does it. I've accidentally caused a massive political issue for everybody. But hey ho. So the law in Scotland doesn't really say this, but the SWA are saying that we're not allowed to add water to maturing product because it's out of sequence. However, we all do it. So we're now working through on changing the law. So it would seem stupid not to. Right. Have you tried it? It's bonkers. If you don't like
Yeah,
big,
every single one. On every
It's really nice. I just add a little more water, and now I actually get a little bit of perfume rose water on the palate. It is super interesting.
I mean, I got loads of kind of cigar boxes, lots of kind of fresh mint and loads of this kind of sandalwoody flavors, which I guess is what you'd expect.
Yeah, I mean, and the nose on this, I mean, I'm imagining a big piece of leather that's probably been outside in the rain for a little bit and brought back in. I mean, it's very interesting.
This doesn't taste like a classic Altmore to me. Altmore to me tends to be, similar to Linkwood and kind of Blair Athol in my palate. It's like fruity and kind of Speyside-y. This one's a lot richer and darker and spicier.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cask is definitely doing some heavy lifting here, but part of it is you find past the stock and you go, okay, this is a fantastic example of this style.
Is there a reason it's so hard to find older of those distilleries, like the Dalmores and the Dolyuans and the Altmores, or the Dolyuans, Altmores, and Linkwoods? It's like everything's in the low teens.
It's just points at which they were producing. So, I mean, Altmore's a funny one because you can find some older stock, it does pop up. But in running in the early 2000s, so if you look at the spread of when distillation was growing in Scotland, we started, like single malt really started to grow in sales in the kind of early 2000s, particularly 03, 04, 05. But the entire Scotch whisky market was geared to blends, and blend sales were in the tank, and had been for 2-3 decades. So all our production was linked to how much Johnny Walker, how much Bells and Grouse, etc., is going to be sold. So you end up with these periods where you're making less. I mean, that's exactly what we're about to go into, right? Everybody in Speyside had a long Christmas holiday. Everybody shut down for an extra week or two to do some maintenance. And you do that because barley's expensive. Well, it's just gone down in price, but it's expensive. And if you make a bit less, you don't have to spend that money now, right? So the market's not great. Sales aren't happening. So we all readjust our sales plans, and you say in 10 years we're only going to sell this much. So we're only going to make this much. But the reality is, 10 years comes around. In the case of like that period from around 2004 to 2008. And in that period, nobody was making that much whiskey because blends were shrinking. Single malts were growing, but no one really saw it as a thing. And single malts were still a tiny part of the market. And then hit 2010, 2011, and One Nation Under Whiskey turns up and changes the entire market. Obviously, it just happens that they started bottling around this time, and then the podcast starts, and everyone starts buying more single malt, and all the producers suddenly have to react to this. But the problem is, you don't know that's going to happen. So you spend your money, the money you've got, based on your sales projection of things only growing by 5% or 10%, and when they grow 20 or 30%, you're kind of buggered, right? So it's just not science. We tend to have marketing and salespeople. No offense to any of those people in the room, who promise that they're going to sell 10% extra per year. And then they're really surprised when that doesn't happen. And then we have financiers who say that we're not allowed to spend anything. And people like me sit in the middle going, if you just consistently made the same every year, it would be fine. But it sadly never works like that. You're never allowed to do that. So you don't get much stock from Diageo distilleries, certainly pre-2006. You used to get a lot of stock from like 98. So 99 through to 2006, just not enough stock made. So you won't see it. It's that simple. Though that's all about to change because what stock was made isn't selling. So they're all going to panic and dump it on the market. So watch this space. You're about to see a load of 2001 and 2002 rock up out of nowhere as everyone stops spending $150 to $200 on bottles of whiskey. So it's great. Wonderful changes we live in.
We're all excited.
Grant, shall we move on to the last whiskey?
Yeah. It's funny, every year my birthday is still the best. My birth year is still the same, but every year we get away from it, it's more and more expensive to try to find an 87.
I mean, that's not helped by the fact that most places are closed in 87. So.
Is that what it is? I can find a lot of 88s and 89s. I can find 86s, but 87 is so hard. It's crazy.
Yeah, so you've definitely got low production years, and you think 87s just post a lot of closures. People didn't want to spend money, so they produced a lot less. Another example is 93 tends to be really tricky for some reason. And that also affects flavor. So you'll have some years where, particularly on places like Islay, if you try Bamor from 1993, almost all the way through to 1995, tends to be more fruit driven. The wood tends to be awful because they don't want to spend any money on wood. But they also didn't want to bring barley in, so it tends to be higher floor malt content, just because why wouldn't you use the floor malting? That's local labour. So all these things affect flavour just as much, if not a little bit more than terroir.
Circling back around.
Yeah.
As we go into our last pour of the night, and before we lose you to your running necessities, I want to ask everyone to raise a glass and cheers to you and smile for our traditional photo. Maybe we can get Pam and Megan onto the call with us. She's all right. She's gonna share Sid Arts. All right, perfect. Ollie's gonna join us. Yeah, grab a glass. It's they say it's good for the run.
Anna, is that right?
No one says that.
Anna does a lot of running. She'll tell you.
She's my trainer.
It's totally great for running.
There you go. It's like a protein drink.
Yeah, I mean, it's carbs-ish. It's grain. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Awesome. Well, cheers. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ollie.
Cheers.
Hold on. Got it.
I'll actually leave that till afterwards. See if there's put that on there.
What are you drinking, Ollie? What did you pour?
I poured myself some Tullamore 2014 American Oak Pedro Jimenez Hogsheads from Miguel Martin.
Speaking of Tullamore, what are your favorite Tullamore bottling that we can go hunt down?
I mean, there's been some good early 90s stock released by a few independent bottlers. I thought Thompson Brothers did a really good bottling. Depending on how flash you're feeling, if you go onto auction, you can sometimes find the dark green white label 1970s 10-year-olds. They're bottled for the Italian market, and they are phenomenal. That's the earliest distillate from the distillery when it was direct fired and fruit driven and mental. But due to a random Sikh guy who seems to be a little bit obsessively buying them, the prices have gone up. Luckily, he doesn't mind opening them. I've got to try them too. Apart from that, I mean, it's tricky because I don't, Tullamore for certainly the recent history, it's been produced as a blending malt. they've gone through periods of production. So early 90s, it had some spent brewer's yeast in, but it tended to be a cloudy wort, so it's a little bit more nutty. Late 90s, they got rid of the brewer's yeast, and maybe there was a little less fruit to it. And then by 2005, when Chivas bought it, they changed the profile of mashing. So 2005, 2006 tends to be quite fruity. The only real issue with that is I don't like the fermentation profile as much. So it tends to be very light. So some of the younger stock we're still working with it. It works really well in American oak. It's beautiful in first fill bourbon, and even with sherry, I tend to focus on American oak for Tullamore. Just seems to love vanilla. So
my cheat code has historically been to just try and grab anything that the Whiskey Exchange offered, knowing who the owner of the Whiskey Exchange was and Tullamore, and hoping that there was a little bit of that transfer. No,
we haven't actually bottled anything for TWE. I mean, we obviously sold the Whiskey Exchange. We now have a very funny relationship with them. That's how I imagine a divorce works. You have to look after the children, but you kind of resent it a bit. I think that works both ways. So we haven't done anything. Although watch this space. So I do a project with the buying team there, and we're doing a single cask project this year, so I might slip some Tullamore into it. We're doing a couple of single malts of Scotland releases, but they've been kind of market specific. And later this year, May this year in Speyside, we'll be launching a series called Blueprint, which is pre-release of what we're going to be doing in the future. So we've been re-racking stock for the last coming up to 3 years, with the ambition to build a kind of core product that we can launch. And what we've done is we've taken apart some of the kind of certainly in terms of wood, the profiles that we've been building, and we're releasing them as the kind of building blocks of Tullamore, so you can try those styles. They're at a pretty reasonable price. Is the idea. They'll be bottled at 48%. And it won't be in a massively fancy bottle. There'll be no box. And the whole idea is to get people to try it so they can see. So the release is set. Actually, I need to go and get the cask pulled in the next couple of weeks. So we're doing a first fill bourbon release, a toasted barrel release, and a cream sherry release. Yeah. It's an excuse. That's just an excuse for me to talk about cream sherry and drink cream sherry. Yeah. I'm secretly a 90-year-old granny. Quite happy with my life. Right. Shall we try some Kalila? So we put the peaty whiskey at the end. This is another reserve cask, so it's again 48%. And the makeup is actually it's two different cask styles. I haven't got a cheat sheet on this, so I'm having to remember stuff. Apologies. And Kalila's spirit profile is obviously smoky. You tend to get this kind of lemon thing running through it, the zestiness. It's massively flexible and seems to work on a lot of different wood. We use lots of refill Kalila, so you guys probably have tried, hopefully have tried Port Ascaig, and there's when we did the cask strength release last year, that was all kind of majoring on refill and a bit of first fill bourbon. Very much that kind of fresher side. We
have not done a Port Ascaig tasting yet, so nobody's tried it. So
okay,
if you want us to try it, it has to be an official event.
No problem, Sam. You can help me with that, right?
We'll make sure you get it on the calendar for sure.
So this is made up of some of those refill casks, but then there's also this wonderful stock that we bought, and the wood profile says new wood. Now, when I see new wood, my immediate thought was, oh, interesting, new barrels of some description. Why would they fill those? And then I found out that new wood in Diageo speak simply means a cask that they deem to be more active because they've largely it's normally like rejuvenated wood. And they don't really give you much detail in terms of what they're doing. But during this particular period, they were buying a lot of wood from Spain. And the reason they were buying it from like Spanish wine producers, the reason was that they were really struggling. We had a barrel shortage, the previous barrel shortage around 2010, I think. Yeah, around 2010. And Diageo's answer to that was bugger it, we'll buy wood from somewhere else. So they went to Spain and they found they could get loads of cheap wood out of Spanish wine. And then they would take that wood to Scotland and they would de-char it, re-char it, and say, brilliant, new wood, all set to go. So it's like an early adopter of the STR, basically, if you like. It's kind of Diageo's take on that. And they were doing this before Jim Swan made it all fancy and everyone got excited and distilleries started talking about it. These are kind of moments that you start to realize that companies like Diageo actually are at the forefront. They just do it in the background, don't talk about it, and hope it works. The problem is that they did it on loads of different styles of wood, and they don't really differentiate in their, at least in their sheets to sellers. So they just end up putting it into various flavor camps and saying it's over there. So you will get on this loads of kind of toasted vanilla, really rich. There is this kind of fruit like tasting notes up actually. Very long tasting notes for this one. You get this kind of almost like marmalade-y kind of bramble tea, like dense fruit thing running through it, which makes me think that there is maybe a little bit of wine left in said barrels that's sitting inside the wood, and you end up with all this kind of char. I love this style of Kalila because to me this is the dark side. It's the bit that tastes a bit like you take a mackerel and you stick it on a barbecue and you get that kind of burnt skin thing, which I just adore. Like, so yeah, this is one of the beautiful things about independent bottling because you come across this stuff with no rhyme or reason and it just tastes great. What do you think? I mean, it's quite a big whiskey.
I feel like all night each whiskey we went through was better than the one before it, and I think I mean people in the group know I'm a peat head, so I mean this is just fantastic. When it's interesting because Kalila 12, the standard bottle, is actually not one I'm a fan of.
Right.
But this particular one, that is nice. This is nice. Real nice.
I mean, we use a lot of Kalila. It's one of probably the only spirit I've worked with more than Tormore because I've been working with it longer. We've been filling Kalila since 2015, 2014. And it's a fantastic profile. It works so well in almost everything. And it always delivers. And it's also consistent, right? It's consistently brilliant. It is that balance between citrus and smoke. And
it's interesting because we had one a couple of weeks ago where they finish it in cherry cask, and it did not work for me at all. I mean, again, just for me. So but this I'm a fan of.
Just so you know, there is actually a rule. If you bottle a bad Kalila, you have to hand over all your stock. Fundamentally, it's a crime, and you're not allowed to play anymore. It's like taking the toys away.
Yeah. I like that rule.
Although it's worrying that you don't like Diageo's Kalila because that'd be a big move, big power play. Take away 6 milliliter distillery.
The thing I find interesting about the Diageo's kind of dechar rechar that they do, I've been to one of the cooperages there, and in America, we tend to note like the different toast and char profiles and the numbers with that, which, there's some precision with that, but they don't. It's all very mechanized. And so it's not a char 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just a and then done. So it's kind of interesting, but we can't complain because obviously the whiskey's brilliant, that it comes out of it. But I just find that interesting that it's not as specific as like what we're doing on this side of the pond. It's just kind of a cool comparison.
I'm not trying to boost your ego, but you are better at wood technology, just in every way. We work very closely with a couple of cooperages in Kentucky, and although there are slightly different methodologies at both, it is amazing. Like Andrew looks after all my wood, and listens to dodgy podcasts on wood, which probably sounds worse at 4:51 in the morning than it's meant to. I can ask him, I can phone him up and be like, right, I want this kind of profile, and he'll go and speak to one of his guys in France or the States, and they'll come back with, right, so if we do this toasting profile and this, your spirit will take this long. So they go, right. And then you go to Space Oak Cooperage, which I adore, right, because they're my neighbours, and Malcolm's a really good pal. And you stand by a barrel and you smell it. And, that's that then. So it's a slightly different take. I once stood outside the cooperage, like, taste as long as you want. Let's just stand by it and smell it. When you think you're happy, we'll stop. Right. Good. The scientific method.
So we've all voted for our favorite expression of the night, and the results have blown my mind. And I'm just curious, can you guess what the favorite of the night was tonight?
I have no idea. I voted for one which was terrible, but I shouldn't be voting. I voted anyway because otherwise it's screwed.
But you're here. All right. This is all over the place. Usually there's a clear winner. All right, the results are in. I'm going to close this down and share it, just for shits and giggles. The winner is the Macduff. What? Of all the things in this lineup, 5 votes for the Macduff took first place. Wow. Dal Ewan second, and Altmore Blair Athel's third, tied. And Ben Rinnes and Kalila also got a vote. So it's all over the place.
Well, I mean, I think it just shows how much we liked them all, really. And it was a tough call. But I voted for the Macduff as well, but it was such a hard call. And I went back and forth and I was like, well, you know what? It's just so drinkable. Just pick it up and drink it, Whereas the other ones, how do I say, they challenged me more, right? And those are good. You always want something that challenges you when you want something that challenges you, right? Sometimes you just want something to drink. I thought the Macduff was super interesting and very drinkable. And that's why I went for that one. But another night I could have gone for any other one except for the Kalala. I just don't like the peat. So
Yeah.
So this
one of these days you're going to grow up.
No, I don't spit it out anymore, Henrik. You don't understand how big a deal it is. But some lucky winner is going to get this 1 ounce taster right here.
Yeah, guys, this is a big deal for Kate not to spit Pete out. Huge deal.
I turned the camera off just in case.
That being a winner will make Ollie really proud, because that's his project that we were kind of brainstorming, but we wanted to make the whiskey more affordable. Yes, it's not 1 cask. Yes, it's not at the higher strength or cask strength, but we're trying to bring one expression from each, major producing region of Scotland. And used to be Clynelish and Linkwood and etc. But that was a little bit challenging, but it's a winner. So congratulations to you, Mr. Chilton.
No, good.
after Kalila being Isla, we're going to bring some Bonahaven, Stoisha. Just be prepared. So we're going to continue sourcing those casks and using all his talent of putting them together and watering down to 48%, but that's okay. We can handle that.
48 is still a respectable strength for sure.
I like Owl's take on this because I like it at 48%. Why 40? Because I like it. Because we can.
You've got to have a good reason, Sam, for these things.
There's only 2 out of the 6 was 48.
That was a choice, yeah. Yeah.
I actually added the water to each of the single casks just to prove Ollie wrong because he waters it down in many cases, not all the cases, to a certain percentage. But, it's good to prove him wrong. But yeah, I thought adding more water to these single casks actually made it beneficial to my taste. So
yeah, I'm with you on that one, Sam. So
I'm pleased, Henrik. You liked something that's not pitted. That was music to my ears.
Ollie, this is great. Thank you so much. Thank you for spending the evening or your night with us. We hope you have a fantastic run. All of these were fantastic, but yeah, I as much as I normally foo-foo any bottling that's brought down to a certain proof without reason, just like anything that's a standard, hey, 46, 43, whatever, 100, or 50. Normally I take offense to that because I'm like, well, it's just brought down to one number, right? That's not a palate-based approach. I haven't had a bad reserve casks yet, so you're clearly doing something well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're doing something well, or just we just drink too much, which leads to luck. Right, guys, thank you so much for tonight. I am actually going to try and get to work it out 2 hours sleep before I see my children, and then I'm going to go for my run. But hopefully we can do this again for us gig in the future, and maybe even Tormore. We'll have to see.
Ooh, all right. You're music to my ears. We'll be happy.
Yes, please. See if you can snag some of that low dollar, low cost 1970s Italian green label import for us. That'll be
no problem.
No problem.
We'll chip in.
I hope you recognize this glass.
Do, Sam, I do.
Remember? Perfect measure.
Yeah. The Alex glasses. Yeah, we still have some. Brand. Right. Thank you so much, guys. I am going to run away because if I can get back to bed before 5, I feel like I've won.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Ollie.
Bye.
Bye.